The studio lights of The View were brighter than usual that morning, bouncing across the polished table where the co-hosts sat, waiting for two of Hollywood's most recognizable names to arrive. Producers in headsets scurried around, whispering last-minute directions. The energy was heavy with tension, almost electric. Meghan Markle had been booked for the episode weeks ago, intending to talk about her latest advocacy project in her upcoming docuseries. The audience was buzzing, eager to hear her speak, but there was another guest, one that even Meghan herself hadn't fully expected to confront in such a raw, unscripted way. Angelina Jolie. When the doors opened and both women walked out to thunderous applause, the contrast was striking. Meghan, dressed in a sharp cream suit, flashed her practiced smile, raising her hand to the audience like royalty greeting subjects. Angelina, in a sleek black dress with minimal jewelry, walked calmly, her presence quiet yet commanding, her eyes cool and piercing. The hosts made polite introductions, trying to ease the atmosphere. Meghan leaned forward almost immediately, her voice rehearsed and confident, talking about her projects, her humanitarian vision, and how she and Harry had been misunderstood by the press. But from the beginning, Angelina's silence was noticeable. She listened, tilting her head slightly, her expression betraying nothing. When it was finally her turn to speak, her tone was measured. "I think what matters in humanitarian work," Angelina said, her voice low but powerful, "is that the focus remains on the cause itself. It should never become about us, or our image, or how we're perceived. Real people's lives are at stake." The room grew still. Even the audience members shifted in their seats. Meghan gave a thin smile, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Well, with all due respect," Meghan replied, choosing her words carefully, "the media is a powerful tool. If you don't tell your story, someone else will. And for me, stepping into the spotlight is a way of giving a voice to others who don't have one." Angelina didn't look impressed. She leaned back, her hands folded gracefully. "But isn't it ironic," she said evenly, "to talk about giving a voice to others while constantly centering the narrative on yourself?" A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The hosts froze, their cue cards trembling slightly in their hands. Meghan blinked, her polished smile faltering for the briefest second before she forced out a laugh. "That's a little unfair, Angelina. You of all people know how the media twists things. I've simply learned to take control of my own story. Isn't that empowering?" Angelina's gaze didn't soften. "Empowering for who?" she asked quietly. "Empowerment isn't measured in magazine covers or streaming numbers. It's measured in the lives you actually touch, the places you go when no camera is watching. The difference between charity and publicity is what you do when nobody applauds." The air was thick, and the hosts tried to step in, but the debate had already escaped their control. Meghan straightened in her seat, her tone sharpening. "I think it's easy to criticize from the outside. But unless you've lived under the kind of pressure I have, unless you've faced the level of intrusion and hostility I've faced, it's impossible to understand why telling my story matters so much." Angelina finally leaned forward, her voice low but cutting, every word deliberate. "Pressure. Hostility. Meghan, there are children in refugee camps who don't know if they'll eat tomorrow. There are women in war zones who risk their lives for basic dignity. That's pressure. That's hostility. What you've experienced is fame, and fame is not the same as suffering." The audience burst into applause, the sound echoing off the studio walls. Meghan's face stiffened, and for a split second, her eyes betrayed the frustration boiling beneath her calm exterior. One of the hosts tried to pivot, nervously asking Angelina about her own work with the United Nations. Angelina spoke passionately, describing nights spent in tents on the Syrian border, her work in Cambodia, and her efforts to give survivors of violence platforms to rebuild their lives. She didn't brag, she simply spoke with the conviction of someone who had lived what she preached. Meghan tried to interject, pointing out her own initiatives and projects, but each time she did, the contrast became more glaring. Her words were polished, but Angelina's were raw, lived, undeniable. Finally, Meghan raised her voice, frustration seeping through her usually polished demeanor. "It's easy to sit there and act superior, but I've inspired millions of women by speaking my truth. That matters, Angelina. People look up to me, they see themselves in me." Angelina's reply came like a quiet storm. "Then give them more than words. Give them substance. Because inspiration without action is just vanity." The audience gasped again, then erupted into cheers and claps. Even the hosts couldn't hide their reactions. One of them dropped her jaw in shock, another quickly took a sip of water to mask a smile. Meghan's face was flushed now. She laughed nervously, trying to regain her footing. Well, it's clear we see things differently. But I think there's room for many approaches. We don't all have to do things the Angelina Jolie way. Angelina smiled faintly for the first time. No, we don't. But at the end of the day, the world won't remember the interviews we gave. It'll remember whether or not we actually changed anything. It was the final blow. The applause was deafening, echoing for what felt like forever. Meghan sat stiffly, her smile frozen, her hand tightening around her water glass. Angelina, serene and unshaken, simply looked out at the audience, her calm presence commanding every inch of the stage. When the show cut to commercial break, Meghan leaned back in her chair, her smile finally slipping as she avoided Angelina's eyes. The producers rushed in, whispering frantically, trying to control the fallout. But the damage had already been done. Angelina hadn't raised her voice, hadn't insulted Meghan outright, but in 20 minutes of steady, unflinching truth, she had dismantled her carefully constructed image. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. And the world had seen it live. By the time the show ended, Twitter was already ablaze. Clips of Angelina's words were circulating, with hashtags like hashtag Angelina Jolie destroys Meghan and hashtag substance over spotlight trending worldwide. Meghan's team tried desperately to spin the narrative, but the contrast was undeniable. As Angelina slipped quietly out of the studio, avoiding the cameras waiting by the door, she carried herself with the same calm grace she had walked in with. Meghan, however, remained inside for nearly an hour, her team huddled around her, strategizing damage control. The debate would replay endlessly in the days to come, dissected and analyzed by every outlet. But for those who were there in the studio, the memory was unforgettable. The moment Angelina Jolie, with nothing but quiet conviction and lived truth, stripped away the facade and left Meghan Markle speechless. And as one audience member whispered to her friend on the way out, that wasn't just a debate. That was a reckoning.